All right. Thank you and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Farm to Cafeteria Canada School Food Infrastructure Fund Grant webinar. Quite a mouthful. We know there's lots of interest in this fund, so thanks for taking the time today. We are recording the presentation. It will be emailed out to everybody after the fact, as well as posted online for folks to be able to reference. I am pleased to be joining you today from the traditional and unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations, also known as Vancouver, British Columbia. My pronouns are she and her. I invite all of you to introduce yourselves or say hello in the chat if you like. Introduce where you're joining from, update your names, put your video on or off, whatever you need to do to feel comfortable. For the first part of today's conversation, we are going to do about 25 minutes or so presentation, maybe not quite that long, and then we'll get into some Q&A. So we do ask if you'd like, you'll have an opportunity to raise your hand and unmute yourself at the end of the presentation to ask any questions you might have. You can also put them in the chat as we go along, and we'll get to those at the end. We know there's lots of interest and lots of questions about these grants, so we're pleased to have you here today and hopefully help provide some clarity on that. So we are going to get started here. As I mentioned, I myself am joining from what it is today known as Vancouver. It is a little bit chilly for this time of year here, but the blossoms and things are starting to come out, starting to smell and feel a lot like spring. And I just want to acknowledge that our team is located across diverse lands of many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And we are grateful for the opportunity to work and live on these lands. Whoops, going a little too quickly here. Sorry about that. So just to cover what we're going to chat about today, we'll do a quick introduction to who we are as Farm to Cafeteria Canada, and ultimately why we're hosting the school food infrastructure grants, which is funded by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. And then we'll get into what the parameters of the grant are, reviewing our application process and some tips for setting up for success with that, share some additional resources, and then get into question and answer as we mentioned. So I know many folks may be familiar with Farm to Cafeteria Canada. For many of you, we may also be a new organization. So ultimately, we are a partnership-based organization that works to transform how food is experienced, learned, and celebrated in all schools across Canada. And we do this with a vision toward food systems that nourish people and the planet. We strongly believe that schools are at the heart of our communities and that we can create lasting and positive change within our food systems by starting within our school communities. So part of the way that we support this transformation is through, of course, grants is one way. So we facilitate a wide range of grants. We also do evaluation work to inform policy, provide space to bring folks together, share in conversation, develop tools and resources, and a variety of different ways just to provide access to information and resources in the school food space. And we do all of this through a comprehensive approach that we refer to as farm or local food to school approach. And this looks different in every community. But what is common to that is basically providing access to food that is healthy and culturally appropriate, celebrating connections to community and the folks that help to steward the land and bring food into our schools and into our communities, whether that's growing, foraging, harvesting, fishing, and also preserving and preparing and serving. And then also hands-on learning, so opportunities for students to learn food skills and connect to the local food system around them. So depending on where you're located, this may be referred to local food to school, sea to school, farm to school, forest to school, really whatever resonates within your community. So that's really the framing that we're coming at the school food infrastructure grants with. We are one of 10 organizations that has been selected by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada to distribute funds as part of the School Food Infrastructure Fund, which is part of the federal government's investment in a national school food program. So really importantly, providing infrastructure to support that. We ourselves at Farm to Caf have $1.1 million to distribute in funds. And I will just note that what we're presenting on here today is our process. So each of the 10 different organizations has a slightly different process, slightly different timelines. The overall kind of structure and what the grants can be spent on is fairly similar across the organizations. But primarily what we're presenting on today is our process. And if you have questions, we'll do our best to answer those. We are in touch with some of the other organizations, trying to work together as much as possible. We do have a chart as well. I know you won't be able to click the link here, but we can share it out and you can see a list of the different organizations that are providing funds and the timelines of their grants and any specific focus if they have them. So a little bit about the goals of the grants. So these are very purely infrastructure funds. So that 100% of these funds must be used to purchase and install infrastructure and equipment that increases capacity within community organizations. So really importantly, although this is to support school food, the grants are targeted specifically to community organizations that work with schools or school districts to produce, process, store, and distribute food for K-12 school food programs. And with that, goal is to really strengthen broader community local food system and to help to ensure that children have nutritious, culturally relevant meals they need to learn, grow, and reach their full potential. So anticipated outcomes of the grants, and you'll see these throughout the application uh, guidelines and the application process itself. It will also very much be in the reporting. So these are going to be things that we'll ask organizations to report on. And that is that you've increased your capacity to deliver school food programs. And these are defined as initiatives that provide meals or snacks to schools. That the overall food environment has been improved within the school, and that community food security has been strengthened. So organizations that are eligible to apply for these grants, as I mentioned, must be community-based organizations, and they must be engaged with school food programs. This being said, I know having a national school food program in Canada is new. And so if you're not already working with a school that doesn't or a number of schools that doesn't necessarily exclude you from being able to apply, but you must have some engagement and demonstrate opportunity and relationships to be able to scale up and work to support school food programs in your community. And you must be either an incorporated not-for-profit or a charity. The following entities, unfortunately, are not eligible recipients. So municipal and school bodies, this includes school boards, individual schools themselves, local governments, health authorities, government and quasi-government organizations, including band councils, which are considered government, academic or other educational institutions, and for-profit entities. So a little bit about our grants specifically. We are focusing on community organizations that are specifically looking to increase capacity to serve more local and seasonal food in schools. So we know this is a goal for many of the schools that we work with, but often can be a challenge just with the school year in most areas of the country not aligning with many of the growing seasons. So really looking to help support capacity to harvest, preserve, store, and distribute local and seasonal food to schools. And then second, community organizations that demonstrate a clear commitment to supporting and advancing Indigenous and Black food sovereignty. So we will be prioritizing requests from organizations that serve schools attended by children and youth in lower income families, as well as visible minority and Indigenous communities. And that is true across all of the grants, all of the organizations distributing grants, I should say. So some other details that are specific to us. You can submit grants in any amount, so there's no restrictions. If you are looking for $3,000 or $30,000, any grant amount is accepted. I shouldn't say is accepted. You can apply for any grant amount, and then what we'll be asking is just that that amount should be proportionate to the activities that you're looking to do. And we will be prioritizing applications that have an ability to demonstrate that there's going to be a strong impact relative to the amount requested. High potential to advance those outcomes that I mentioned earlier, which again are listed throughout the application process. You'll see it will very clearly define in the application itself some of the outcomes that you'll be asked to report on, just so that that's really clear. And also that your organization has the capacity to administer the grant. So those will be the key things that we'll be taking into consideration when reviewing applications. The other thing that's important to note with these grants is that all of the funds must be spent by March of 2026. So March 31st, 2026, to the end of the government fiscal year. And all of the activities related must be completed in that timeline. There will be opportunity to complete reporting after March, but the activities and the funding must be spent by March of 2026. And we expect to be communicating funding decisions and starting to transfer funds in June of this year, with the intention of hopefully allowing organizations to get as organized as possible over the summer, so they can have as much as next school year to be able to implement the infrastructure into service. So eligible costs for this grant, and you'll find all of this in the About the Grants document that's on our website, and I can pull up after if needed to reference. But all of the infrastructure must have a usable lifespan for at least 2 years. So important to note after the end date. So that would be March of 2028. And this chart you will find in the grant guidelines. It's not meant to be exhaustive, but to give some examples of the types of infrastructure that would be supported through this grant process. I would pay special attention, especially to the ineligible costs. And if you have something that is you're not sure about, that's not listed in the eligible costs, you can feel free to reach out to us, and we can do our best to find out for you. If we don't know the answer ourselves, we can certainly check with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. The other important thing to note is that when calculating your budget, and there is a budget and work plan template that's provided, and you'll ask to be uploaded as part of your application. In doing that, we will ask you to list the amount of funds that are being requested that are eligible. So that would be for any, including any taxes that your organization is not able to receive a rebate from. So if you're not sure of what your rebate eligibility is, we would encourage you to check out the CRA's website. And we do have a link in the guideline document to help calculate that, because unfortunately, those costs that are eligible for rebate, we're not able to provide funds for. And so in terms of the application process, really strongly encourage folks, if you haven't already, to review the About the Grants document, which I mentioned. All of the information that I've just shared is in the About the Grants document, including the table of eligible and ineligible costs. And then you can start to prepare your responses. We do have a Word document, how to apply. So this is basically an exact replica of the online form that you'll be asked to use and complete. And so this just makes it hopefully a little bit easier to prepare your responses, collaborate with others if you need to. and you'll see there's quite a bit of kind of additional detail about information that we're looking for in some of the responses, and that we'll be using to evaluate the applications. You'll find that in this document. And then once you're all ready to go, you can complete the workbook template. So there's going to be two tabs in there. There's going to be one for your work plan. So basically the timeline of when you'll kind of order, purchase, install, and operationalize any equipment that you're purchasing through the grant, as well as your budget. And so you can have one larger piece of equipment, you might have multiple pieces of equipment, you might have installation costs, shipping, all of those would be eligible costs, and we'd ask you just to break that down in the budget template. And then we do have an online form that you can complete the grant, and that's linked from the workbook itself as well as on our website. And that is something that you can come back to. So if you get started, so just going through a little bit more, so you'll see all of this is at the top of the how to apply document as well. These are the two templates. So work plan, as I mentioned, and then your budget. And then when you're all set, oh, I'm getting ahead. When you're all set, you can upload that to the online form, as I mentioned. If you do get partway through that and you need to come back to it, you can just hit save and you'll be emailed a link to the application. So you don't need to create a login or anything, but you will be emailed a link, and then you can come back to your application at any time before the submission deadline. So with that, a few important dates to note. Just to recap, I did mention, so our grants officially opened on March 24th. Applications are due May 2nd at the end of day. And then we'll be communicating decisions, as I mentioned, by the end of June, and hopefully starting to get funds out to folks as quickly as possible following that. And then all of the program deliverables completed, funds spent by March of 2026. Just a few things to consider in preparing your applications. So I mentioned earlier that demonstrating experience working with school food programs and having established relationships in particular will be really important. We will be looking for evidence of that within the grants. As I mentioned, because these school food programs are newer, if starting to work with schools is something that's new, that's okay. We just really want to see the potential there, support from the school communities that you'd be working with, as well as other community partners. In terms of financial reporting, we will be asking folks to submit itemized summary of your expenditures, including copies of receipts. There are pretty stringent requirements in terms of eligible and ineligible costs as part of this grant, and auditing requirements. So just to kind of help make things easier for everybody from the get-go, encourage you to track those expenditures, keep track of your receipts, and you can send those to us anytime. You don't have to send them kind of at the end in March of 2026. Basically, as soon as you spend funds, you can send those to us. And the other thing to note is that we will be, in terms of reporting, asking for both a baseline report as well as a final progress report. So that baseline report will be communicated out just to gather some basic information about the school communities that you serve, the number of students, things like that, all of which are in the application template. But we will ask you to share that with us for the folks who are selected to receive a grant in pretty short order after completing your contribution agreement, which will basically be the first step when you learn that your application has been successful. And then the final progress report will be happening next spring. So after the activities have completed, you'll have some time to report on those in the spring of 2026. I just want to take a moment to talk about data protocols. You will notice this in the About the Grants document. And given the focus of Indigenous and Black food sovereignty and goal to advance that through these projects, I do just want to note and recognize that we are asking for a fair bit of reporting. And so we, in all of our work, we have created data protocols informed by our Circle of Indigenous Advisors and the Black School Food Working Group with the Coalition for Healthy School Food. And these protocols basically guide how our team and our partners work with and share the information that we receive by schools. And so you can read those in detail in the About the Grant document and let us know if you have any questions. They have been developed rooted in Indigenous data sovereignty. And as part of the reporting, we'll ask for you to share impacts through a story, and we'll develop summary of impacts that we hear both through the stories and any kind of survey style reporting that we capture. That data remains yours as a community or community organization, and you can ask us to edit or remove it anytime. And yeah, we welcome questions and feedback on this process. Last but not least, before we dive into some question and answer, I will just encourage you can check out our resource center at Farm to Cafeteria Canada. You'll find it across along the top toolbar or by visiting the URL at the top of the screen. And here you can find a range of resources, inspiration, stories, if you're looking for ideas or inspiration or just ways that some other communities have made programs work. I encourage you to check that out. But with that, I will transition us to question and answer here. I'm sure there are lots. I see some comments in the chat, so I'll take a moment to just familiarize myself with what's there. I am going to stop sharing my screen just so that you can all see me a little bit better and I can see some of you if you have questions, and we can get started. So bear with me just one moment. Thank you for your patience. I'm just going to check out the chat here and see what we have is the way of questions.
I did put a little strawberry beside the ones that kind of.
You're amazing, Sue-Ann. Thank you. For those that may not know Sue-Ann on the call, she's a member of our team, the coordinator of the Indigenous School Food Circle. So thank you, Sue-Ann, for doing that. Okay, so how do we define a community-based organization? Yeah, so great question. Basically, a community-based organization is essentially at its core needs to be a nonprofit or a charity, but really importantly, it can't fit any of the ineligible organizations that I mentioned. So can't be considered for profit. It cannot, so things like small businesses would not be eligible. Um, Local governments, any type of sort of government or public sector entity could not be eligible, but things like community centers, different societies, different community-based groups that would work with facilitating programming within your community. And if you're unsure, you can always about your particular organization's eligibility, you can always reach out to us and ask. But fairly safe bet if you are a not-for-profit or a charity, you're very likely eligible to apply. The one thing that I will just note where there is some nuance, I know that a number of First Nations communities or bands have a charitable number. Unfortunately, because they are considered government, they would not be eligible to apply, which I know is a limitation for many folks. And in those cases, we would encourage if you have a community partner organization that you can collaborate with to apply, that can be the lead applicant. That's what we would encourage in those cases. And I know that even that may not be the case for everyone, especially in some smaller more rural and remote communities. So if that is the case for you, um, yeah, happy to connect and encourage you to reach out for us to us, and we'll do our best to support troubleshooting some ways that you might be able to co-apply with another organization. We have a question here about defining youth. Yes, so these particular grants are for essentially the K to 12 setting. And so that includes what it would be defined typically as school age. So we know that there are also some schools that support adult learning within the high school setting, for instance. Unfortunately, those organizations are not eligible. It's K to 12 for sort of the roughly kind of 4 years to 18. Question about tractors and other infrastructure that could be used to produce food for school food programs eligible. That is a really great question. We've heard a lot about distribution and transportation, so things like refrigerated trucks and things like that. I would think yes. I would probably want to double check that with AAFC, but certainly it's a part of food production, so I wouldn't see why not. I don't profess to be an expert in the costs. I think the only thing to note with that is I know that some tractors and larger farm equipment in particular can get quite costly. So it's likely that like realistically the grant might only be able to cover a portion of that. But if you have other sources of funding for larger pieces of equipment, certainly you can apply to the grant for a portion of those funds. And there is a place in the budget template where you can list other sources of funding. And that information is really helpful for us because if just in terms of looking at the big picture of what's being asked for. So if you do have larger pieces of equipment, encourage you to share other sources that you might have to help if you're only asking for a portion of it through the grant. So question about whether, yeah, if we pay upfront and are reimbursed so that funds are distributed prior to spending. So yeah, as much as possible, we want to make sure that organizations have the cash flow to cover these costs. So we will be dispersing 100% of the funds that you're approved for at the start of the grant. So we're not doing a holdback of any kind. These are grants that we're asking for you to spend within 1 year. We know that it's often large pieces of equipment, so we will be providing the funds up front. But as I said, we will ask for you to submit itemized expenditures as part of the reporting. Um, okay, and question here about whether or not you can apply to other organizations that are also providing these funds. So the other 9 organizations, yes, you definitely can apply to other organizations that are distributing the funds. We do have a question in the application as to whether you're planning to or have applied for other funds. So we just ask you to put a little bit of detail in there just so that we can communicate with those other organizations. The At the end of the day, the only restriction is you cannot, if you receive a grant from both organizations for the same expenses, you would only be able to accept one of them. But in theory, if you applied for 2 different things and you got both, you could be in a position to accept both grants as long as it's covering different expenses. Um, and hopefully, I see there's some sub questions there. Hopefully, that helps to answer that. Um, Question here, given that there's a fair bit of reporting, but funds can only be used to purchase equipment, how do organizations recover the costs for work related to grant compliance? Yeah, it's a really great question. I know it's tough that there's no sort of program development or administrative funds, but that would have to be part of the kind of your organizational capacity. And we'll try to make that reporting as streamlined as possible. But there certainly we recognize there is administration to come along with these grants. So those would be things that would need to be covered through other sources. And that's unfortunately something that's out of our hands. That's a stipulation of the grants as a whole. So we have a question here about an organization asking about deer fencing and if that would be part of building a garden or permaculture. Yeah, there's so many nuanced things like that that are that are specific to different regions. And I would think as long as you can demonstrate how how it's supporting the overall goals of the grants, you're certainly welcome to apply. But we know that it's specific to everybody's context. And so we would just need to be able to see how it could help to achieve um, the the grant outcomes. What I would encourage in a case like that is um, if that's the sole cost, that might be a little bit trickier. But if it's part of a grant where you know you're installing a garden, and part of that is, and you have costs associated with that as a whole, and part of that is to protect basically your installation, then I could see it being a part of that. But I think it would be a little bit trickier case to make if it's solely for the fencing. Shade structures associated with equipment for food processing and prep, i.e. canning and fish, be an eligible expense. I think the response there would be similar. So if it's part of sort of um, the overall operation. But these are some of the things. These are great questions. And as I said, this is the first time these grants are being administered. We're getting lots of interesting questions. So some of these we will take back to our the other organizations as well as to Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. And what we can do is we can add them to an FAQ on our website just to give a bit more definitive answer because there's a lot of nuance I recognize. So we have a question here about organizational capacity. So we're a small charity. What type of financial documents are accepted, audited documents, or can verified financial statements be considered enough? Yeah, I mean, as much as possible, we want to make these grants, you know, where we can create opportunity to increase accessibility, we want to do that. So we're not requiring fully audited financial statements. We know that that is quite costly and a challenge for some smaller organizations. So if you do have whatever the highest level of reviewed financial statements you have, please share those. And if we have any questions, you know, we can reach out to you. Okay, so we have a question here. Um, we've ordered equipment to open two school new cafeterias. So basically this question I think is around if you've already committed and ordering equipment, could that be eligible for the grant? And I am going to need to double check and get back to you on that because I feel like we've gone a couple different ways on this one. So give me a moment to get back to you on that. My understanding is that the equipment does need to be purchased um, sort of after successful application, but We know that there's a lot of variables and factors that folks are working with in terms of restrictions of the school year and sometimes shipping and depending on where you're located. So I would want to just double check on that and certainly we can communicate that out as part of the webinar follow-up. So we have a question here about including hiring a person to increase the ability to operate a better food program. Unfortunately, not. I know that strong teams and having the human resources to support programs is essential. But unfortunately, these funds must go strictly to equipment. I think if there's opportunity to partner with other organizations, that's within your community. But yeah, that is where kind of that organizational capacity will come in, unfortunately, as a limitation for these particular grants. Okay, so transformation and preparation. We have on both sides of the eligibility of eligible and not eligible. For example, cooking activities requiring buying food and paying for cooks. So I know that I'm just going to pull up the eligible costs here to have, I've got them in front of me here. So I know that there are some specifics of that are eligible and ineligible. So for instance, food production, where we have some things that, technically are food production, but that are not eligible. So like aquaponics. So essentially there are some, excuse me, so for that transformation of the food system, so food itself, any kind of consumable is unfortunately not eligible. Um, we're looking at things that are more like ovens, refrigerators, freezer space, dryers, things that support like preservation activity, any kind of like chafing dishes, things for service, storage, those are all going to be eligible. I would mostly say the the eligible costs, and I know this is a bit confusing, but the eligible costs are, although those aren't exhaustive, if there's anything that you're looking to purchase that is in the ineligible, I would steer clear of that. And then if there's anything that you're unsure of, you can reach out to us. And if we're not sure, we can double check with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Okay, so we have a question. We know that each organization um, providing the funds is a bit different, but is there a frequently asked question document on, oh, that there is a great FAQ on the Atlantic. So yeah, thank you for folks that you can check out the Atlantic FAQ. Absolutely, and we'll have an FAQ following this conversation um, added to the website as well. So we have an administrative question here. So would a nonprofit be the name on the application form, or would the nation be the name on the application form? So I'm assuming this is maybe a question that is coming from a First Nation that has a nonprofit. So I would encourage you to reach out to us just to confirm eligibility. Because unfortunately, even if a First Nation has nonprofit status, it is considered government, so the nation itself is not eligible to apply. However, if you have a partner organization in your community that is a nonprofit or charity, they would be eligible to apply.
Ouais, mais c'est parce que ça glisse, c'est une mauvaise chose.
Um,
And sorry, it's just Lorena. Thank you. So then say it's I don't know, Save the Children Canada. Then Save the Children Canada, or their proper name, that would be the person on the application form?
So if you have a community organization that is applying in partnership with your community, then yes. Then the only thing I would note is that organization needs to maintain ownership of the equipment. So that's another important thing to note that I haven't said. Although schools are not eligible applicants, equipment can be installed in a school so long as the ownership is retained by the community organization.
Very good. Thank you.
Um, okay, so question. Yes, okay, and I see that question has come up, so hopefully that answered that for you, Marin. Okay, and I think we have a question. So, yeah, if your school is a registered charity, are you eligible to apply? Yeah, unfortunately not. So that's where there is that nuance that the eligible application needs to be a nonprofit or a charity, but must be a community organization. So it can't be a school board. I know many do have charitable registration, but unfortunately, they're not eligible to receive the funds. Yeah, and absolutely an email where you can direct specific questions. So I'll just pop that in the chat for folks. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us. And I'll put that in the chat right now. Are churches eligible? That is a good question. I believe so. We haven't seen, there's nothing suggesting that they're ineligible. Carolyn, do you want to jump in there? Have you seen anything?
No, I think that they would be. Yeah, on one of our calls, we were brainstorming what organizations might be in communities that would be eligible. And yeah, the church this might be some of the ones that could be drawn.
Mm-hmm.
We can double check, but we should.
Yeah,
something that would suggest otherwise.
Yeah, we've got a couple of things to follow up on that certainly we can report back to folks on. And as I said, if you have any questions, we know that there's a lot of nuance here, and so yeah, we're here to do our best and support you as much as we can. So please don't hesitate to reach out as you're preparing your application. We'd rather have you connect with us before putting in a ton of work, and yeah, try to get you on the right track as much as possible. Any other questions from folks? Okay, so clarification question here. Yeah, so really, yeah, just speaking to there are going to be certain organizations, yeah, absolutely, that are kind of best suited to these grants. So yeah, there's a certain level of capacity that organizations will need, as we mentioned, to kind of facilitate the fund, to have the staff and additional capacity to kind of implement and the programming and do the infrastructure.
But at the same time, Jesse, a small organization could apply if they have the capacity to manage it and have the partnerships in that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There were just some questions earlier about like being able to have, hire staff and that kind of thing. So if if you've got folks or either within your team or within the community and other partnerships that can collaborate, and that's where there is an opportunity in the application to just help us understand kind of your whole community context.
Yeah, I think the main thing that would be small for small organizations is that, yeah, there isn't admin or staff covered, and it's really just for those hard costs.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? We have a few minutes left. So if folks have anything or you want to stick around, our team will be here for a few minutes and yeah, happy to chat with you if you like.
I assume the question came up about whether people could apply to multiple organizations of the initial organizations for funding and
Yeah. Yeah, we did have a couple of questions, Carolyn, that I said I would want to just double check with AAFC, just around eligibility. So like tractors and other farm equipment came up, and I said I think so. It's involved with food production, but that was one. And then I think the others are things that are helpful for kind of within the overall system. So if you have things like structures for protecting, um, uh, like shade structures for protecting like preservation equipment or deer fencing, those kinds of things. So we might want to get some specific guidance on those, but. So a question about words, phrases, concepts that we're looking for the grant application. I would say your best guide for the cheat code is going to be the About the Grants document. We've got a lot of kind of tips and hints in there as to what we'll be looking for. I'll just put a link to that in the chat, as well as the application template itself. Within the kind of subtext of the grants, we try to give as much information about what we'll be looking on for. So I would say if you hone in on that, that's the best sort of the best guidance we can give. We won't necessarily be looking for specific words per se, but I would say the key things are that we have a good picture of your school community, understanding the partnerships that are in place, the schools that you work with, and that there's evidence of support there. And then in terms of this particular grant, as I mentioned, we are looking for that type of infrastructure that is going to specifically help to be able to serve more local food and to advance Indigenous and/or Black food sovereignty in your community. So those are kind of the key things I would say, in addition to the capacity, of course. And thank you, Chris. Yeah, we do have a glossary linked in the About the Grants document that says how we define some of those terms. Diana has a hand raised.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for listening to all my questions. I don't know whether this is the right forum, Jesse, to bring this up. So I work for Canadian Feed the Children, and we have partners across Canada, Indigenous community partners, around 26 of them. And when this sort of grant became available, we had been approached by Indigenous Services Canada about whether or not we would be applying or sort of having a role in this at all. And we kind of, based on the way it's structured, didn't really see there being like, it didn't really make sense for us, if that makes sense, because the way we work is that we end up funding organizations, like community-based organizations in our Indigenous communities, who then lead the work, as opposed to us being the direct implementers. So for me, I don't see this being necessarily like the right grant for an organization like Canadian Feed the Children. But the reason it was brought up is because a lot of the community-based organizations that are, providing this kind of service in the communities where we work, they would have a really hard time with like the administrative burden of, not burden, but the administrative requirements of managing the grant. And so we were asked whether we'd be comfortable to play a role in supporting our communities in that regard. But because of the way it's structured, like it doesn't really make sense for us to be an intermediary. I don't know if that's the correct read of the situation. I don't know if you can clarify that, but we are getting a lot of requests from like our partners and from other like larger bodies about can you, participate in this in to some extent. But from what I'm seeing, it doesn't really seem like it makes sense or is feasible.
Yeah, it's certainly a limitation, and it is a question we've received, and it's something that we are discussing with our counterpart distributors, and we'll be bringing forward to AAFC because, yeah, unfortunately, we know that in some communities there isn't any kind of organization that is best suited for this. And so, yeah, we just acknowledge that. I can't say. I think it's ultimately up to Canada Feed the Children if they're able to play that role for some, but I could see that it's not, it doesn't quite fit how you work. And so that's feedback we'll be taking to the folks that we're working with on administering this. And I can't say I can't kind of promise anything one way or another other than to say, we definitely recognize it as a limitation. And are doing our best to see if we can find some solutions for that.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. I'll just add that the different funding streams, like the National School Food Program funding through provinces and territories, through Indigenous services, through CERNA, through this is the attempt to support the community sector side. But yeah, throughout that, we're seeing kind of gaps in terms of like people like, oh, this doesn't fit, but this also doesn't fit. And so I think this is what we're seeing is some growing pains and like just the, attempt to try to service some needs, but maybe making it so that there are some gaps for sure. And so like Jesse said, we'll be sharing that and hoping that some, people can fill those gap spaces. But if there are, communities that don't have an existing relationship with an organization who can play the role, it's definitely a tricky one.
Yeah. And I'll see there's one more question that's just come up here. I know we are at the top of the hour, so if you need to jump off, thank you so much for joining. But I'll just address Brianna's question about being able to submit more than one proposal, but from different teams. I would strongly, in theory, yes, you could submit two proposals, but I would strongly encourage you to work together and kind of put your energy and efforts into your best idea and put that forward. Thank you so much for everyone. We'll be hanging around for another minute or two if anyone has any questions, but otherwise I'm gonna stop the recording and we'll look forward to seeing your application soon.